Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Noah Mintz. I'm the store's event coordinator. Community Bookstore is celebrating over 50 years in business, and we credit the support of readers and writers for that milestone. So thank you for spending the evening with us. Tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome Allegra Hyde to celebrate the launch of her debut novel, Eleutheria, in conversation with CJ Hauser. Now to some housekeeping. We've enabled Zoom's auto-transcribe setting. So if your version of Zoom is up to date, hit the live transcription button at the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. If you have questions for tonight's guests, please click on the Q&A button, which is also at the bottom of your screen, rather than the chat, to submit them. We will be asking those at the end of the program, so please don't be shy. I will be posting in the chat a link to buy tonight's book if you haven't already. And one caveat for tonight is that we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise. We will try to resolve them quickly. We have a great lineup of events planned for you as we head into spring, so head over to our website, communitybookstore.net, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out in particular is next Tuesday, March 15th. We're thrilled to welcome Catalan writer and artist Irene Solà and translator Mara Faye Letham for When I Sing, Mountains Dance, in conversation with C. Pam Zhang. That program is up on our website now and taking registrations. So now a little about tonight's guests, and we'll get started. Allegra Hyde's debut story collection, Of This New World, won the John Simmons Short Fiction Award through the Iowa Short Fiction Award series. Her stories and essays have appeared in the Pushcart Prize, Best of the Net, the Best Small Fictions, and the Best American Travel Writing. Originally from New Hampshire, she currently lives in Ohio and teaches at Oberlin College. And CJ Hauser teaches creative writing and literature at Colgate University. She's the author of the novels The Fromaways and Family of Origin, and her fiction has appeared in the Paris Review, Tin House, Narrative Magazine, Tri-Quarterly, Esquire, Third Coast, and the Kenyon Review. She holds an MFA in fiction from Brooklyn College and a PhD in creative writing from Florida State University. She lives in Hamilton, New York, and her book, The Crane Wife, a memoir and essays, is coming out in July. So now, without any further ado, I'll hand it off to you. The screen is yours. Allegra, CJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Happy Pub Day, Allegra. I promised I had a tiny mortifying spiel, which I wanted to sort of kick us off with before I invite you to read. For all the people in the audience who I know probably know you, but I have to do it anyway.
Oh no.
Allegra Hyde is the sort of person in a writing workshop who speaks softly, but everyone around the table shushes to listen because she offers such thoughtful and brilliant advice it would be silly not to. She is the sort of teacher who, when a timed exercise is up, says ding, 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 because she has a brilliant little bell. If you are lucky, Allegra Hyde will send you snail mail that is positively explosive with oddities and delights, stickers of dingoes, and instructions for creating a terrarium. If you ask Allegra if she wants to hike to a secret waterfall, she will say yes, and she will help you pick up leaves the size of elephant ears along the way. If you tell Allegra your name is CJ and she tries to guess what it stands for, she will guess Carl, and you will feel seen. Because Allegra sees people as complicated and sees the world as being full of more than people too, full of plants and animals and climates and coups. In very official capacities, I have said that Eleutheria is full of the poetry of planet Earth, and I mean it. It is a book for the smart yet ever hopeful. It is destined to delight those of us who like books that keep us up past our bedtimes, guessing at what will happen on the next page and failing to imagine anything half as extraordinary as what Allegra has invented. It is the work of an expert craftsman who has created a narrator and a structure so elegant you'd have to squint to see the mark of the hand that worked so hard to make it. So many people have been cheering for the publication of Allegra's debut novel, Eleutheria, today, among them the Los Angeles Times, and I am totally chuffed to be part of celebrating its launch. And so now that I've probably mortified Allegra a little, I would love to invite her to read from the book.
Thank you so much, CJ. That was really sweet. And you know that I would go to a random waterfall anytime. Even though, as we discovered, there are poisonous snakes to be found on the path at every turn. But it's such a pleasure to be here in conversation with you. I'm really grateful to Community Bookstore for hosting this official launch. I also want to just give a shout out to the team at Vintage who brought this book to life, especially Sarah and Annie, my editor, Caitlin. I want to say thanks to my agent, Erin Harris, Also to just my family and friends who have made this book possible. I'm so grateful to all of you for supporting me over the many years it took to write this really weird book. So as you may know, this is a book about climate change, activism, doomsday prepping, relentless optimism, and it's a book that is set primarily in the Bahamas and Boston, as well as a cameo from New Hampshire. I'm going to read from the very beginning. I'm going to read the book's prologue. It's just 2.5 pages. It will give you a chance to get a sense of the novel's narrator, Willa Marks, as she looks back on the events that make up the bulk of the book, which are basically her decision to leave her life behind and join an eco compound on the island of Eleutheria, as well as the events in her life that led up to that decision. So I will read now after I take a sip of tea from this giant New Hampshire mug. All right. My father had a theory for why people went to the ocean in the summer, spent their savings, their vacation days to plant themselves on a patch of sand within sight of the water. Even if they don't know it, my father said, what they want is to be close to death. That's what going to the ocean was, according to him, a chance to strip down and expose yourself to danger, to risk sunburn and dehydration and errant strikes of lightning, the foot slice of seashells, sand-submerged needles. At the beach, you could wade out into waves that might pull you into a riptide or the jaws of a shark, or even if you only dipped your toes in the water, you'd still know you were stepping into something so vast it could engulf you, swallow you whole. It's not that people want to die, said my father. It's just that when they go to the beach, a part of them knows deep down that they could. So afterward, when they return to their 3-hour commutes and their cubicles, they return with a secret sense of survival. They feel woken up, more alert. My mother snorted when she heard this. She, like my father and I, was crouched in the dark gut of our emergency bunker, yet unfinished, but stocked with canned goods, blankets, a stack of semi-automatic rifles. We were practicing what to do in the event of an electromagnetic attack. Going to the beach, said my mother, won't save you when SHTF, shit hits the fan. My parents didn't think we needed the beach because, unlike the masses, we were already alert to the horrors and dangers of the modern world. Unlike the masses, we were already prepared. So I didn't go to a beach until I was nearly 18, and then it was only a shabby artificial one near Logan Airport. I didn't go to a beach until after my parents couldn't survive themselves. And then when I went with Sylvia, that felt different, not like pressing in close to death, but already existing in an afterlife. Really, my father's theory didn't mean much to me until these last 8 months, the ones I've had to think through what happened on the island, what happened at Camp Hope. All this time, I've had to wonder what it was we were really doing, what it was I did. And now, of course, I have hardly any time at all. Maybe I should have been thinking of my father right from the beginning. Maybe I should have thought about where I was really going when I first careened over the archipelago in a turboprop gun shop from Florida, and those islands looked to be all beach, the Bahamas that scattered along the turquoise lip of the Caribbean, their coastline sandbar swirled, coral dazed, the islands so low in the water they seemed poised to hold their breath. A little more sea level rise and they'd be washed away. Already their edges were eroding, ocean swells grabbing at coastal roads, at the underbellies of beach houses not yet leveled by hurricanes. The worst of the storms had turned whole resorts to matchsticks, their swimming pools gone green from neglect, pagodas engulfed by vegetation, hibiscus blooming in marble, bathrooms quailed up shitting on embroidered towers, another empire born and bowed. And yet, when I looked down from the turboprop, pressed my face to its oval window, I felt only possibility. I felt more than alive. My whole life, I've run away from my parents' way of thinking. That's what I wish people understood. Despite everything that has happened, the way everything looks, I only ever wanted to make the world better. I only ever wanted to help. You should know too that I recognized Eleutheria from the air. I knew the island even before the turboprop circled toward a ragged stretch of tarmac. The island bathed in the water like a fishhook, a skinny 100 miles that curved at one end, its shorelines barbed by peninsulas, baited with the green sway of sea grapes, beaches as pink and fine as spun sugar. I felt Eleutheria catch my heart and pull. And that is the end of the prologue.
I need you to know that my dog came over and was drawn to the sound of you reading the prologue, which if that is not an endorsement to buy this book, I don't know what is.
What an honor.
He's a very literary dog. He has good taste.
And a philosopher.
He is. But more importantly, there's so many things in that prologue. I love about that prologue that it has all of the things that are sort of percolating around in the rest of the book are sort of in there already. But I guess I want to start by asking you about Willa as a narrator, because I think it's the moment when you just read the thing I wish people knew or understood, where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I trust this person completely, or I don't know if I know everything that's up with her. Could you talk about her role?
I think in a way she's making a case to the reader, but she's also making a case to herself in this book. And the whole book, it's almost all her narration. It's kind of the tyranny of her voice in a way. And I hope that some of the interest in the overall story is trying to parse kind of when can we totally buy into what she's saying? Can we buy the claims she's making for what is good and right? And where might we feel more distance from her? So I love, the fact that kind of right from the beginning in that prologue, you were sensing some maybe uncertainty about whether to totally trust her in every moment.
Yeah. And I think just so people can relax in the audience, I have promised not to give spoilers because I am the sort of person who people won't watch murder mysteries with, because I'm always like, I know who did it. But I was very surprised by multiple turns of events in this book, and I will not ruin them for other people. That being said, I feel like as a reader, I was constantly like wanting to trust Willa against my better judgment. And I wanted her, she's so hopeful, and I wanted to believe in the hope that she believes in. And you didn't let me do that all the way through. And I think that's really interesting. Did you always know she was going to be sort of an unreliable narrator, or did that happen along the writing journey?
It took me a long time to truly get to know Willa and even to like her myself. There were times in early drafts, I just felt like taking this narrator by the shoulders and shaking her a little bit and being like, why are you doing this? Why are you making these choices? Even though obviously she's my own creation. But I think over time, as I learned more about her motivations, what made her tick, what she was afraid of, ultimately I came to care about her a lot, even as I was pushing her to sometimes get into trouble or make potentially problematic decisions. So I hope that in the end she comes across as a complicated human who, like everybody else in the world, is flawed and but also full of gifts as well. And that's my hope.
Yeah, she's I think a lot about the line between like hope and naivete for myself. And then also my students think about this a lot. I teach undergrads. I know you teach undergrads. And they think a lot about how to stay hopeful when they see the world as it is, and like what kinds of hope are productive and helpful and which kinds are dangerous. And I feel like this book is like deeply engaged with those questions. I mean, what do you think about like hope and naivety, or I don't know, the possibilities of it?
Yeah, I really wanted to interrogate hope because the world feels so hopeless. So often there are so many terrible things happening at any given moment, so many crises unfolding. And I think in general, there are two ways that people respond overall. There's either kind of ignoring it, tunnel vision, business as usual, we're just going to kind of soldier on forward, or there's a acknowledgement of the many challenges that takes the form of a kind of nihilism and despair. And neither of those approaches to our reality feel satisfying to me, or feel like paths that can engender any change. And so pursuing hopefulness, or pursuing kind of exploring hopefulness seemed like something I wanted to show in fiction, show in story, take it to its extreme. And you're right, there are times when that hope is expressed more as a kind of naivete that is dangerous for characters and has the potential to cause problems. But it also is, I hope, just offering another way of being in the world. And I think if naivete is the risk of believing that a better world is possible, that there are avenues for change, then I don't know, that's a risk I'm willing to take sometimes. And that was a journey that I wanted to put my characters on.
Yeah, because how can you do anything if you're a nihilist? There's not positivity and good work coming out of nihilism. But I think you complicate it. I admire so much about this novel how every time you sort of let the reader settle into like they've understood a new thing, then it gets twisted again and it gets more complicated. But it's only once we're ready for it, which is very crafty and impressive. There's this part, so this is also kind of about hope, but like not a good kind, maybe, because I'm about to quote to you from a fake book that you have written, which is The Solution, and this is the guidebook for, is guidebook the right word?
Yeah.
Guidebook for Camp Hope, the place that we just heard about Willa going. And many things from this book have stuck with me, but nothing perhaps more than this, which is the part where it says, there must be an alternative, a new ship, not a life raft, an offer of salvation that is at once familiar and improved. There must be the promise of more, not less, which I read as satire, but then I also read it as like, oh God, is living the solution right in a way? I don't know. Could you talk a little bit about that text within the text and that passage?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say first, it was really fun writing this false document within the text and pulling these quotes from this guidebook that is supposedly showing the official path to solving climate change via this community, Camp Hope. And I think I wanted to show a kind of environmental dogma taken to an extreme, and a particular way of approaching activism, let's say, that takes on a quality that echoes the puritanical agendas of yesteryear, that carries this sort of way of moving through the world, this agenda that is built to kind of steamroll anything that's in front of it. And the echo with Puritan settlers with a colonial mentality is meant to be shown through those historical interludes that also run through the book, and that document the cycles of idealism and exploitation that have been present in the Americas and especially in the Bahamas. And the hope was that this sort of pattern would be evident in Living the Solution when it shows up on the page. And we can kind of see the same way of thinking being expressed, that in some ways seems promising, seems like it has some good ideas, but when put it into practice, it isn't taking into account the complicated reality that it's situated in.
Yeah, and I feel like when I was reading the passages that take place at Camp Hope, I think they're sort of funny. Like they're like everyone is taking things so seriously, and then they're sort of bickering over things that are nonsense. And there's like sort of a starlet who's sort of like gone to hide it. Like maybe she's also doing it for publicity. And so there's like the possibility of humor there and in the text as well, which I think is so amazing. And then you'll sort of drag our eyes over to the left a little, and just down the island there's a resort, a hotel, like a tourism industry that's happening there in the Bahamas with the character of, is it Darren? Duran, sorry. Yeah. I don't know, could you talk about, because I think you're talking about idealism and exploitation, and there's sort of this whole functioning business that the island is depending on for its livelihood, and the camp is sort of in contrast to that. Does that fit into that idealism and exploitation you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the history of the Bahamas and the pattern of kind of colonial exploitation, and that has played out over and over and over again over the centuries, is absolutely meant to be embodied in Camp Hope as a kind of neo-colonial enterprise. So when we're just within the walls of Camp Hope, it can seem less problematic as a kind of closed entity. Willa thinks of it as a sort of life-size terrarium that she's in. But placed within the context of the island, just the larger context of history and in the world, it needed to better negotiate kind of what it really meant on that island and who it was benefiting and why.
Yeah, the idea of things being closed. I love the terrarium imagery whenever it comes up. I cannot resist doing this. Here is a tiny that Allegra has drawn. But the idea that it's fine on its own, but it's not sort of scalable, I think is really interesting commentary about so much climate change work that's being done right now, and being done with really good intentions. But so often it's the scalability maybe that's the issue. Is that sort of part of the terrarium thing, or is it more about I don't know, bubbles, in the sense that we talk about being stuck inside our own bubbles and not seeing the big picture?
I think of it as I think of the idea more as just an expression of the fact that a movement for sustainability can't succeed and shouldn't succeed unless it's also a movement for social justice, for equality, a movement that's making sure it's prioritizing the needs of the most marginalized populations and their voices and their leadership. And Camp Hope very much is not doing that, even if in a way it seems like it has figured out how to potentially make progress along when it comes to sustainability.
They are, however, taking interns, and the hapless interns are perhaps my favorite part, whose parents have sent them off for resume lines and who find their experience on the island less cushy than they would have imagined.
Yeah, the recruits.
Recruits. I guess I want to think about like the natural world as you write about it, just because I think it's like some of the most beautiful prose in the book. But you always sort of I don't know, have an edge to it. And I'm going to read a tiny bit of You to You, which I know is, but a passage I am just absolutely obsessed with is on 179 for those people following along at home. Spring arrived in a bright glassy burst. Snowdrifts disappeared, their secret contents exposed, the melting archaeology of coffee cups and single mittens and lost house keys. Daffodils knifed up from the soil and green blades donned their yellow bonnets. Rhododendrons blossomed, azaleas too. And I'm skipping down. If I'd been paying attention, I would have connected the blooming to the global spike in CO2. Such displays were happening in countries all over the world, happening in the sea as well, where coral blazed bright yellow, pink, violet, the colors visible from the air like desperate neon signs, begging for attention, for rescue, their gorgeousness pleading with the human eye for help. It's like, it's extraordinarily beautiful nature writing, but it's also the idea of like, you're looking at this beautiful thing and it's like, are you paying attention right now? I don't know. Is there writing about the natural world or about climate change that has meant a lot to you? Is there a way that you found yourself in this mode of like needing to give an edge to this kind of prose? Because when I think about the future of nature writing, it's inherently like the future of climate change writing at the same time.
I think one way to engage with climate change as a fiction writer or as a writer in general is simply to write about your environment and to pay attention to it, and to, I think, giving attention to what trees are doing, what the weather is doing, as compared to paying attention to, say, brands and giving them airspace in your writing. To me, I think that matters. So that's one reason why it's evoked in the novel, and why it comes up in a lot of my writing. I also, in terms of giving kind of these depictions of the natural world an edge, I'm interested in trying to convey in my writing the fact that we are constantly being affected and influenced by the world we're moving through, while also having an impact on that world, that it's a two-way street of impact. I think when it comes to setting generally in fiction, it can often be rendered as just a kind of static backdrop behind a character. And I'm in my work, I'm always looking for, how can I make that relationship more dynamic? How can I make setting not just three-dimensional, but kind of four-dimensional in how it's being expressed? And how can I make it clear that it's a kind of ongoing relationship between setting and character in every moment and every scene.
I love the character of the settings that we travel through feels very alive and almost like menacing at times, because in the world of the novel, things are going poorly. And so there's a sense of sort of like beauty, but danger that's always sort of poking in through your use of the setting, which I love. Are there places, I don't know, are there places that you go just as a person to sort of be in the natural world, or to do long thinky writer type walks? I don't know, or does that make you happy?
Yeah, and that's also one of my coping mechanisms for for climate change. When I do feel a lot of despair about how things are going, I find going out into nature and spending time in the woods, watching the birds, or other animals or plants that really don't care at all about what I'm doing. Generally, they have their own thing going on. Just watching them and their kind of neutrality in a way towards everything, I find really helpful and really comforting. I find looking for moments of joy in natural environments when I'm walking through them can also just be a way to maintain hope and remind myself why I care in a way. when it comes to writing about this stuff, to researching, engaging with it, talking about it. And to actually answer your question about where I go, I really love walking around.
I don't want to dox your like secret nature hangs.
It's not a secret. I like to walk around. Now that I'm going to say this, it sounds almost too much, but I do like to walk around this big field of solar panels that is on the edge of the Oberlin campus. It's a really beautiful area, and it's the kind of place where you'll be walking along the path and like butterflies will burst up or a deer will scamper away. And so that's where I go to think my deep thoughts.
I love that. There's something about the way, like you're walking through solar panels, there are all these giant wind turbines on the hills where I live. And I know there are complicated feelings about wind, but and wind energy is actually what I mean. But I find it reassuring. And I know that like part of the idea is like that's not supposed to be there. It's not nature. But when I see it, it makes me feel more hopeful, like we're trying or something like that.
Yeah, I always feel really inspired when I see a wind turbine up on a hill, and so I'm here for it.
I want to talk about sort of closed communities and like running away. I think that's such a big part of the book, and it's sort of one of my favorite things to read about. And you've given such a fresh bent to it here with the eco compound. Are there, I don't know, movements, compounds, cults, communes that you researched, or sort of intentional living experiments that you researched or were just fascinated by as you started to think about this book?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a long-term devotee of the utopian community, and ever since I learned about them in high school, I've just been fascinated by them. First one that I ever visited was called Fruitlands. It is now no longer functioning, but you can visit the site of it. Founded by Bronson Alcott, Louisa May Alcott's father, and it was a proto-vegan compound, and just the play of kind of idealism and disaster in that community just really fascinated me. It seemed both admirable and comedic and awful at the same time. And so since then, I've spent just a lot of time reading about different communities and also visiting intentional communities when I'm able. One kind of landscape that had a big influence on the book was my time in New Zealand, where I spent a number of months visiting a lot of hippie communes, and while I was trying to become a hippie and failing. And I think just really being immersed in those communities that were trying to live intentionally, trying to do their own thing, trying to step away from the mainstream was really inspiring. And again, also sometimes horrifying and comedic. And I think having that experience really infused this novel. And even if Camp Hope isn't a hippie commune, it still is kind of wrestling with that same issue of big ideals and then human fallibility, and what happens when they collide.
Yeah, and I think there's a way too that if you go into a place with big ideas and beautiful hope, there will be new rules. You can throw away old rules and old systems and ways of making things work, but then you have to make new ones, and that's immensely tricky. And I think that the members of Camp Hope certainly struggle with that. I think, I don't know, I wonder if you think it's an impulse to sort of start again. Is it an impulse to remake the world? Is it running away? Is it, what do you think drives someone to go to a place like Camp Hope?
Well, I think that a lot of intentional communities are founded as a reaction to something that feels broken in society. And maybe it's labor equality, maybe it's environmental disaster, as in the caves of Camp Hope. So I think, yeah, they're born as a reaction to a societal problem, and they are an effort to kind of fix that problem in some way. And I think people go to them for all kinds of reasons. Maybe you join an intentional community because you do truly believe in the mission. Maybe you're just looking to freeload. Maybe you're trying to escape arrest in some way. I don't know. Or maybe you're trying to remake yourself in a way. And I know that when I went to New Zealand, that was really true for me. I was trying to reinvent myself. And so just as these communities were trying to reinvent society in a kind of hippie way, I was trying to become a hippie and hoping that the community would work on me. And I think for Willa, that's also true at Camp Hope. She wants to be someone who kind of walks the walk, talks the talk, and like lives up to her own sense of what is right. And she's hoping that that Camp Hope will do that to her, that it will kind of shape her, and she'll feel better about herself at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think she's looking for mentors, for answers in a lot of different places. And the character of Sylvia is maybe my favorite part of this book. I find her so compelling and mysterious, and I would also show up on her doorstep. Could you talk a little bit about her role in the book and how you've sort of woven her in without spoilers, I guess?
Well, I think Sylvia is in some ways a foil to Willa, because she is kind of not, she doesn't really think that there's a way to fix the problems of society in the way that Willa does. She thinks that maybe in a kind of slow, institutionalized way that maybe change can happen really incrementally, but she feels pretty cynical about it. And she's also, unlike Willa, is highly educated, is kind of settled into her life and her role, and so yeah, that makes her a foil. But in some, I also, I guess, think of her and Willa as holding these two ideologies that form a kind of double helix that holds the book together, because they're operating in relation to one another, and that gives the book a lot of its shape, and that kind of, they are trying to figure out their own relationship with each other, and trying to figure out how they both want something from the other person that the other person doesn't want to give. And I think that push-pull is an important narrative engine, ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly kept me turning pages, saying it past my bedtime several times. But it's somewhat Sylvia's older than Willa by a bit, and then Willa's parents are also sort of in the book. And I think the generational links between those sets of ideologies is really interesting. Her parents sort of being the stone nihilist, just sort of wait for the shit to hit the fan kind of situation to the nth degree. Sylvia is sort of the jaded academic, I say, from my, like, I can hear the students in their dorm over there. And then Willa's like, we've got to do something. We've got to like see what the freakins are up to. We've got to like look in this dumpster. We've got to look in this island. And I don't know, did you think about generational attitudes or sort of ages of characters as you read the book?
I did, CJ, and I think about generations all the time. And one of my secret personal victories in this book was including a description of a speculative political system that has to do with generations and the way different generations think. And I call this system generational representative democracy. And the idea is that rather than voting on government representatives by geographies, we vote on them by representatives. And so in that way, the voice of young people, of us millennials, of even kind of people who are not yet born, or maybe our ancestors, all have a way of kind of contributing to a conversation about what's happening in the present, rather than many of the kind of decisions about our made by our government being made by people who are all part of the same generation that in many ways doesn't have the same stake in the next 50 years the way we do. So yeah, I did think a lot about generations and different ways of thinking.
Please write about this as a sort of Swiftian proposal that I will actually take seriously. It reminds me of sort of the transhumanists who want the great apes to have voting rights, and sort of there's a Susan Barba poem in which the Colorado River sues the United States for the rights to its own health and cleanliness. And I can imagine like all sorts of different like delegates in that system beyond demographics of humans as well.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to call corporations people, maybe we need to run with that more and balance it out and call more things people.
Rivers, a few primates. I want to ask you so many more things, but in the very near future, I'm going to ask the people who are listening out in the audience to ask us their questions. So I'm giving you a heads up so that you know that is coming. Thinking about generations, thinking about doom. I feel like, I don't know, can you talk about humor a little bit? Because I feel like I know you to be a funny person, and I found parts of this book very funny. Are there writers who you find funny, or sort of comics or sort of ways that you engage in humor? Am I being crazy to say that there is some actually pretty great humor in this book?
I hope it's a little funny. And to me, that it's just another kind of way of engaging with climate change without it becoming just overwhelming and too depressing. And in my writing practice, I do love watching stand-up, because I think it's such it's so interesting to see how a joke can be built, how it unfolds. Fiction writers, I love, for instance, The Idiot by Elif Batuman, and I loved the thread of humor that runs through Alexandra Kleeman, Something New Under the Sun. So it's absolutely something I'm drawn to.
I wondered too, I should ask you, because this is your debut novel. You've obviously published a book before, you published stories before, but it's a very different beast to sort of plan out a long project or to stick with a long project of this sort. And the book has a pretty ambitious structure as well. Are there things, I don't know, what would you be willing to share about things that you struggled or fought with along the way in doing this project, things that you discovered and had like cackling at your desk breakthroughs? I assume other people do that, not just me. Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the experience of actually writing the book.
Yeah, I think it totally alternated between cackling at my desk and like sobbing at my desk, because it took a really long time. It took over 5 years and involved just a really vast amount of research. And I have always found writing short stories to be pretty intuitive, but writing a novel felt like a totally different creature, and I had to learn a lot in order to do it. And I think one area that I spent a lot of time studying was just how to make a plot work. What even was plot? And so I ended up reading a lot about screenplays and the kind of underlying structure of something that was very plot based, so that I could try to bring that architecture to a literary sensibility.
There is a lot of very high octane plot in this book. It definitely worked. I'm going to ping to a question because it seems related to what we're talking about from, I'm sorry that it says anonymous attendee. If you wished yourself to be known, I'm very sorry. But anonymous attendee asks, can you talk a little bit about the leap from short fiction to a novel?
Yeah, well, one thing I should say, could come clean about, is that this novel in many ways was a short story first. I wrote a short story called Shark Fishing that was in my first collection. And it was the longest story in the collection. Oh, there it is. It was the longest story in the collection, but I still felt like there was more to say. And so I ended up working on this novel. So I think, I don't know if I would recommend doing that at all, because you have to kind of break the story open in order to expand it and reinvent it and re-inhabit it. So that was kind of part of the process. I think when it came to writing this novel, once I really understood the structure, that I was going to have these alternating sections moving between Boston and the Bahamas, that I was going to have the historical interludes threading through that text, that helped the novel really just hold together better. And I think structure for a novel felt even more important than sometimes for a short story, which, at least for me, I've found I could get just a voice to kind of sometimes carry more. But I couldn't just rely on voice when it came to this book.
Yeah. And I think someone else had asked about whether or not it had grown from a story. And so you've answered that question beautifully as well. Here is a question I'm delighted to ask you from Kyle Belmont. You have some experience with baking for an intentional community, even managing their lost and found. And I'm wondering how you might create your own utopia and how you understand utopias to be reliant or not on those outside the utopia. We could have a whole panel on this.
First of all, hi, Kyle. Thanks for coming. And Kyle's talking about Star Island, I believe, which is an island off the coast of New Hampshire that in many ways feels like a utopian bubble, because it's cut off from the mainland, and the workers there, who are called pelicans, who I was one of, kind of form their own subculture in a way over the course of a summer. And I think in some ways, if I could create my own utopia, I would just create something that looked like Star Island, a place where people have maybe the space and time to get to know one another really deeply, to invest in activities that they care about, like playing guitar or sitting on rocks and watching the sunset. And I think there's something about islands and the way that they do give you just a physical sense of space and a kind of mental sense of space that is really powerful, and that is just a way to start to think differently and live differently and act differently.
I wonder if there's a way in which globalization is sort of a facile term to use, but sort of the connectedness of the world in some ways, where we think about the scale of problems in places far away every day. We wake up and I think about Ukraine, and the sort of impulse to go small, to an island, to a closed community, as a sort of self-protective thing to sort of defend against that.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense, that we do live in a world where we're everywhere all at once, and the internet makes us aware of every person everywhere in many ways, and that can be great and useful, but it can also make it difficult to see what's right in front of you, and to, as we all know, connect authentically to people in the real world.
Yeah. We have another question, which is, what secondary character do you love most from your novel, and why?
This is a tough question.
Which of your children do you love most, Allegra?
I'm gonna give a shout out to the cousins who appear in this book. They're Willa's cousins. They're kind of one might call them airheads and self-obsessed. They kind of live for Instagram and are kind of live in a sort of virtual reality. They have a kind of utopia of the internet, we might say, in the way that they're creating this other identity for themselves and living vicariously through it. and in many ways are not likable at all. But I think they're an important bridge for Willa between her life growing up, where she grew up with doomsday prepping parents, and kind of her introduction to the real world, to Boston, and they shape her in many ways, and they also, in their own weird way, take care of her and teach her things. So I also just had fun writing them, so they were favorites.
They're very fun to read as well. And they're sort of, I don't know, they have a kind of like, I'm thinking of the movie Heathers from the 90s, like a kind of vibe to them, where they're like terrible but fascinating. And it's like, I want to see where they're going. I'll follow them. I have a question from Ariel Delgado Dixon, which says, can you speak a little bit about another recurring theme in Eleutheria, love?
Well, hey Ariel, I think you're trying to make me blush, and I'm just gonna roll with it. I think love is absolutely a reoccurring theme in Eleutheria, and it seems like an important topic to bring into a conversation about climate change, because when we're thinking about crisis, about, temperatures rising and seas rising, it can all get very theoretical and mathematical, and it can just be all statistics, and all those things are part of our lives. But at the end of the day, we're all still human, and we're all going to fall in love with each other and be managing our little human feelings. And that's going to be part of any experience of climate change, alongside the statistics and alongside the many challenges and hardships.
Maury has once again been drawn. Maria Alvarez, hello. What are some rituals, Maria asks, that help you access the world of your manuscript? Do you light a candle, play some music, drink from your favorite mug?
Hi, Maria. I think that you're naming many things that I like to do. I love a candle. I love some incense. Definitely, I listen to a lot of lo-fi, and that mug of coffee is everything. I also find it really helpful to start a writing session by reading writers I admire and just immersing myself in inspiring prose, and that can do a lot. Yeah.
I have another question from anonymous attendee. They're probably not the same one. How did you land on Boston as the main US city to set the novel in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that it in no way was random. It was very much meant to be part of a kind of interconnected story that I was telling in this novel. I wanted to ultimately show how as people, as communities, we are all connected through time and place, and that a climate disaster is never just a disaster or an event in one place. It's part of a larger narrative that we all are responsible for and connected to and affected by. So Boston was, as we know, is a city that very early city, and or very early European city, I should say, in the Americas, and settled by Puritans, and those Puritans ultimately sent some resources down to the island of Eleutheria in the Bahamas, where another struggling Puritan settlement was. And as a kind of thank you, there are better retellings out there, but as a kind of thank you, the Puritans in Eleutheria sent back a ship full of Braziletta wood, and that wood would go on to serve as the kind of founding endowment for Harvard University. And that kind of historical fact I always found really striking and important, because here we have this incredibly powerful US institution that is indebted to and connected to an island in the Bahamas. And I wanted to show that connective tissue, and I wanted to find a way to have these places in conversation, past, present, and future.
Oh, I love that. Another question, a big one, but a personal one, I guess. Even if places like Camp Hope aren't quite the answer, where do you or where do we find hope?
That's such a nice question. And as I've already said, in some ways, I think just going out into nature and appreciating it and letting it not really care about us, I think is, I find hopeful. I also find hope in seeing activist efforts that are playing out all over the world, especially efforts that are spearheaded by youth activists. I find that really inspiring. I find hope in just person-to-person relationships all the time, and just that that sense of connection, that sense of community. So those are really big for me.
There's a question from Ishrat Syed, which says, congratulations, Eleutheria, Liberty is a lovely name. Will its companion novel be called Exousia, Authority?
That's really intriguing. I hadn't thought of that, but maybe I'll have to make a note. I think it's also a beautiful word.
It is a beautiful word. I have a question while I'm waiting to see if there are any last questions trickling in, about, I don't know, what was it that you hoped to like write towards in terms of the traditions of the novel, or write against in terms of the traditions of the novel? I think there's so much that's sort of exciting and fresh about this book, and I love that it's a queer story. I love that it's an environmental story. I love that it's hopeful and that it's about the natural world. I don't know, what were things that you thought about in terms of conventions that you wanted to balk or embrace?
Well, I had in my mind the fact that a lot of climate fiction that was out there felt like it only showed a kind of apocalyptic landscape. It only showed doom and gloom. And while that was useful, I wanted to write a book that did also showed some doom and gloom as well, but was depicting people who are actively seeking to make the world better. And maybe they mess up, maybe they take the wrong path sometimes, but they're at least trying. It felt important to use fiction as a space to imagine into possible avenues for problem solving, for fixing this. And I hope that at the end of the book, readers feel a sense of possibility, of agency. And it's not just kind of blind hope, but it is a hopefulness that is paired with a sense of recognition of the complicatedness of our past, and how that past has to be reckoned alongside the future that we're building.
I so appreciate, we're sort of at the end of our time here, but I appreciate having a reading experience that both treated me as the reader as sort of smart and capable of being pushed and thinking about big ideas and thinking in new ways, but that also was a book I just really disappeared into and really was like, what is Willa gonna do? What's gonna happen next? And to have those two things together in one text is so rare and so lucky. Hi, Noah.
Hi, thank you both so much for this. This was like a very wonderful conversation. I had a blast listening. Those of you at home, thank you for your thoughtful questions as well. We hope you'll consider purchasing a copy of Eleutheria from Community Bookstore, and to see you at another virtual event soon. There it is. It's beautiful. We have it in the store. You can get it online, wherever. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Noah. Thank you, CJ. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate you.
All right. Good night, everyone. Take care.
Yay, good night.